Apparently we're talking about this again. It's like every other week it's causing drama somewhere. Mostly, it's among indie writers. Please, if this is you, don't take it personally. Everybody is just so sensitive about this. It's always difficult to have conversations about things that people take personally when you disagree with them. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author and a robot, and today we're going to talk about genre expectations, specifically in the marketplace and what it means. Because there's a lot to say on this, and you really can't fit it into 140 words appropriately without getting the full point across. And there's going to be all sorts of opinions. I'm expecting to see your opinions down in the description below. But I think that there are some things that are getting left out of this conversation, like, constantly. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, let me know if there are things that, you would like subjects or questions that you would like featured on this channel, because I try to help writers and readers and just be a community. So you got all of that. And then number two, if you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the two links below, Lemoy and PitchFit. That's the other one. Also, welcome to the void for the video today. It's a good time sometimes. And join us on Loin Stream tomorrow night for the continuation of our current read. You're going to have to show up to see what it is. That's... So I'm doing this subject because it was like a week ago now that the Dumpster Fire website, that's all that we're going to call it, was in another uproar about specifically genre expectations, and a bit much more specifically why romances were required to have a happy ending. Now, the biggest thing that I have noticed in this conversation is that indie authors have and not all indie authors, because let me state, there's so much to say on this, and it's like I'm trying to cover everything, but also it's so hard to cover everything at the same time. Okay, so there are a ton of indie romance authors, big R, that are very successful, that understand the genre specifically, and I give it to them. Like the romance authors, I love romance authors because they are so passionate about what they do and about their genre and about loving love, and they are some of the best people that I have met in the last couple of years are either romance readers and or romance authors, and I just love them to pieces for their passion and love of the genre and love of the work. And so I'm not talking about those people when it comes to this subject, because there are also just random indie authors, and I would say this is probably outside of the romance genre, because they constantly want to break genre expectations and genre rules. And I say genre rules when it's still expectations. And they very specifically pick on the romance genre, because it's constantly indie authors that are saying romance doesn't have to have a happily ever after. But that is one of the requirements of the genre classification. You can have a love story. You can have a story with romance. You can have stuff that is so full of all of these romances, and multiple kinds of subgenres underneath the romance umbrella. But to be a romance big R genre, happily ever after, or at least happy for now, is a requirement, an expectation, and if you write something and market it as big R romance, you're going to piss off the readers. And this is where I also think that there's a disconnect, because it's hard for just about any indie author, and maybe trad authors too, because it's the agent and the publisher that categorize stuff. I have seen more than enough authors talk about how they have, like trad authors talk about how they have absolutely no control over how their books are marketed or what shelves they're put on. So I'm sure that trad authors don't have to work with this as much, but they would still struggle if it was required of them to figure out what genres they are in. But figuring out your genre is specifically to tap into a market with expectations. You wouldn't want to market, say, a romance. Let's talk about space freaking romance, because how many times have I fallen for that one this last year? A lot. Stop doing it. Stop calling romances space sci-fis when they are romances in space. Okay, But finding your genre, labeling your book a genre, is specifically to tell people these tropes will probably be in here. This meets these sorts of expectations. And it stood out more to me the other day when I was browsing the tags and somebody was asking if magic was a fantasy genre trope and could you have fantasy without magic? And a lot of people in the comments, there weren't really that many comments, but a lot of people in the comments were talking about how, yes, of course you have to have magic if it's going to be fantasy. However, when you say that, because number one, now you understand that once you label something fantasy, people are automatically thinking of something very specific when you say this is a fantasy book. And that's one of the difficulties I fell into with Bodymore, is that I know that it was magical realism, but number one, when you go to any of the major websites like NetGalley, it doesn't really have a section for you to drop magical realism in. You just have to stick it under fantasy. But you know what happens when you go look under fantasy? It's got pretty much lots of stuff with magic and sorcery and swords, and that's what an epic fantasy, and that's what a lot of people think of when they think of fantasy. However, fantasy also encapsulates dystopian, steampunk, alt history, urban fantasy, magical realism, stuff with occultism in it if it doesn't drop into horror. So there are all of these other things that is more than just like magical or elemental or whatever. I think there was somebody else that mentioned gods. So if you involve the gods, and so these would all fall into fantasy, but you get your expectations set via the major, the genre, and then by the subgenres. So Bodymore would fall into fantasy, and then I get more specific with finding the audience by saying urban fantasy and or ghosts and or magical realism. I would probably put magical realism above urban fantasy because it does fall much more into magical realism. And that is what happens with these romance stories and happily ever afters. It seems like, and this is all supposition, so the comments are totally open for conversation about this because there is a huge disconnect. But readers and authors approach genres completely differently. And that's one of the things that I've seen a lot in the conversations about genre is authors are approaching genre tags with what they think their books are, as opposed to thinking about the audience that belongs to those genres. And what you need to be doing when you're thinking of genre is a marketing tool. Genre is a recognition of a specific group of people with specific interests that already exist. So if you say that your book is a romance and it doesn't have a happily ever after, you are disrespecting the readership of romances because that is what they expect. And if you then say, well, screw the readership because I'm going to do what I want, then you are more clearly disrespecting the readers. Now, that is not saying that you can't write a love story that has an unhappy ending, or that romantic relationships always have to be more realistic. You're just not writing the fantasy that is the romance. That is like marketing your book as a fantasy novel, but there's literally nothing in it that makes it fantasy whatsoever. What's a good example? If we just marketed American Psycho as a fantasy novel, nobody's going to go into that and be satisfied if they were told that it's a fantasy. Because it's not. And so then in this conversation about genres, I feel like I see authors specifically, I feel like I see the authors participating in this and the rejection of what the expectations are for the genres, because I don't know why they would want to force their book into a genre that it doesn't conform to, because really you're just going to piss off readers and you're going to get lower ratings or bad reviews or no reviews, because a lot of people do not leave ratings or reviews on indie books because they don't want to ruin your business. But you're just going to get less reception because you're mismarketing your book. And I don't understand why people push so hard to put their books into a genre that the readers say this is what we want, and the author, instead of saying, okay, so then maybe this isn't where my book goes, they go, well, fuck you, I can do whatever I want. I can rename what this genre is. When you put your book in the marketplace, you want to appease the readers. Like, you're definitely writing your book for you first and foremost. But when you get to the marketplace, when you get to the marketing items like the metadata and the genres, that is not for you, the author. You don't have to have any consideration to the genre when you're initially writing the book, unless you want to sell in that niche. But if you aren't selling in a niche, You have to, you don't have to. You should respect the genre expectations in order to respect the readership, because the readership is what you are reaching for with the marketing, isn't it? So then if you have readers that are saying, don't do this to the genre that I enjoy, this isn't part of the genre, and your response is, screw you, I can do what I want, then who is your market? And no, and when there are genre expectations like romances having a happily ever after at the end, it's not saying that you, the author, has to write that happily ever after. You only have to write that if you're writing in that specific genre. In the same way that if you're doing a sword and sorcery genre marketing campaign, then you should probably hit the expectations of sword and sorcery. Like, you don't want to do occultism magic and call it sword and sorcery, because you're going to piss people off, unless you're doing sword and the sorcery is occultism style. It's the same thing. You don't want to mismarket it and then just say, just accept my interpretation of this thing. There is playing with interpretations of genres, and then there's just saying, screw it all, I do what I want, and I want to tap into that specific marketing area because there are a lot of people that spend money over there. But if you tell the audience that exists in that genre to screw off, and you're going to do whatever you want, and you're not going to feed their expectations, it feels like you're lying to them, and you will piss off a large section of that readership that will not only not read your book or will leave bad reviews, but they will blacklist you from ever reading you again because you've disrespected the entire genre in order to sell your book. So I feel like I'm talking in circles there, but there is all of that. And then I wanted to mention this other thing that came up because it felt so stupid and I didn't understand. So another thing that came up shortly before the happily ever after romance thing was somebody asked, I think it was an agent, saying, where are all of the happy books? Because a lot of people are writing really depressing books right now. And I understand everybody is depressed. My book coming out in May is pretty much it's a feel-good book. So it's a satire feel-good book. So hopefully, that'll help lighten the mood a little bit. But this agent, I think it was an agent, was asking for happy book proposals. And the next day, there was this random tweet going around from this other person that said, like, I'm not a jukebox for you to put a quarter in. Why are you demanding that I write happy books? Blah, 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 blah. But the initial tweet was not at this responder. It was just out to the ether saying, I would like happy books. But this person determined to take it personally, including going on like a 4 or 5 tweet rant saying, I don't write for you. I can do whatever I want. Yes, you can. What this person was asking for was just happy stories. So if you had them, recommend them to her or suggest them to her. It is not a demand for you to meet her request for fiction. In the same way that if somebody says, hey, I'm looking for a story about books and I'm looking for stories about bird watching, that's not somebody demanding that I write about bird watching. It's somebody that has an interest and is looking for a book that feeds that interest. In the same way that if somebody says, I'm looking for a sci-fi about XYZ, they're not telling me to write that book. It is my choice as to whether or not I pursue trying to write that book and to see if that, maybe they'll still want it in a couple of years when I'm done with it, or I can keep looking for people who are looking for the types of books that I write. A recommendation, a request, any of that is not a demand on any individual artist to fulfill that request. Now, if you go to like manuscript wish list or a number of agent pages, they will say if they're looking for something very specific, but again, that's not a demand that you write for their wish list. It's just they're posting about their interests and things that they would very much be interested in, but if you don't have it, it's not a demand for you to do it. So I really didn't understand this person getting so offended and acting like she was being demanded to write for somebody else because somebody asked for something. So just getting pissy at people for saying I have preferences or I'm looking for this certain thing just didn't make any sense to me. Why is everybody so angry? That's what this all comes down to, is why is everybody so angry at everybody all the time for every little thing? Can we just not? Everything is not being said in order to affect you one way or another. I don't know. I think that's the message of this video. I don't even know if I conveyed very well what I was trying to say about genre expectations and requests and what have you, but if there's any takeaway from this, respect the readership in general. Respect genre expectations, learn genre, and you may not understand what your story's genre is until you put it in the marketplace and look around a little bit. Because readers will sort of springboard off of you. And, well, readers are a good soundboard. Readers who don't know you are a good soundboard for you to see how your work is being interpreted. And even then, it's weird. Like, Bodymore has been called horror, it's been called not horror, it's been called YA by a couple of people, it's adult fiction. Very clearly, Joey is just a little bit immature, but I digress. Respect the genres, learn the expectations, read a lot to see what variations are there, and I will never understand where insulting people or being angry is a good marketing tool or a good way to just connect, not even to sell stuff, but just a good way to connect with other people. Like, I know I can be pretty blunt when I'm talking about any of the books, but I never actually hate any of the books that I read, and I never actually hate the authors of any of the books that I actually read. That takes so much energy to be that angry. I'm like, this is kind of torture to read, but I made it to the end, and okay, that's over with. That's pretty much it. So I've been saying it for a while now. If you've read Bodymore, people are angry because they already dead. I'm sorry the Bodymore was so prophetic. If you want to understand that reference, check out Bleed More Bodymore, available at all of your favorite retailers. But let me know what your thoughts are on the subject of genre expectations. Well, for the reader versus the author perspective, what your perspective is on all of this, probably going to get spicy because every time this stupid conversation comes up, people get angry and there's some inability to just take things apart and talk about them without taking it personally or getting angry. We can have some legit conversations. It might help everybody understand each other and also be able to just get by with disagreements. That said, thank you so much for watching. Looking forward to the comments down below, but maybe I shouldn't. I am a little scared of these comments, let's be honest. Both of these videos this week have just like subjects I'm kind of like, both of these are inviting anger. Why do I do this? But thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend, and maybe I'll see you tomorrow at the Loin stream. It's gonna be lit. It always is. Got the best Loin fam. Okay. That's enough. Don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?